Hi, I'm Warrick from Harder Steenbeck, and if you're thinking about buying an Evolution 2024, or if you already own one, then this video is for you. A couple of years ago, we decided to create video instructions for our airbrushes, and now we've decided to release them publicly here on YouTube. We wanted to make it easier for all of you to see the kind of support that we offer and what it's really like to live with an H&S Evolution 2024. In this video, we'll show you how simple these airbrushes are to live with and use. We'll show you how to change the head systems, identify the different sizes that we offer, and explain the unique Clog control head system, along with all the other features that make the Evo 2024 so user-friendly. You'll also see how quick and easy it is to strip and clean the airbrush, no tools required. And we'll also give you a bunch of trigger exercises to help you get comfortable with the feel and control of the airbrush. Our goal is simple. We want to give you confidence and to show you that H&S builds a system that makes airbrushing as smooth, intuitive, and creative as it can be. The first thing you need to do with your airbrush is connect it up to a compressor. Now, the reason why I say that is because a lot of our customers have the idea that the first thing they should do is to strip the airbrush to understand how it goes together. Please don't do that. The reason why is because you'll see from your box that all of our airbrushes are tested in the factory as the last thing that happens before we ship them in the box to you. We would really like you to paint immediately when you take it out of the box, because that's the point where you can really understand what your airbrush is capable of doing when it's factory fresh, and you need to know what that performance feels like so that you got the benchmark for the future. Okay, so we've got our brand new Evolution 2024 CR Plus out the box and we're ready to paint. So I've got this one set up on the 0.28mm fine line head. We're just going to look at the essential components of how to get started with painting with this airbrush. I'm going to assume that you haven't painted before, so we're going to do some basics, just show you how to get going with this airbrush and hopefully set you on the way to a wonderful creative journey. To connect it up to your hose, all of our airbrushes are supplied out the factory with this quick disconnect system on the bottom. If you have a quick disconnect on the end of your hose, which looks like this, then all you need to do is simply press it home. You've then got air connected and your airbrush is ready to paint with. If you don't have a hose with a quick disconnect system, it's really not a problem. All you do is just unscrew this last little part of the end of the airbrush, and then you'll have what's known as a 1/8 BSP thread, which is pretty much a universal thread for most airbrush hoses now. Okay, so now let's get into the operation of the airbrush. The first thing that we'd like you to learn is how to operate the trigger correctly. All of our airbrushes here are double action triggers, which means that you push down for air and you pull progressively back for paint. The right way to use a double action trigger is to push it down first, then you'll hear the air start to come, and then you progressively pull it back. And then once you've done the stroke you want, you press it forward and then you release it up. Okay, so it's down first, then pull back, then press forward, and then release. So the first thing is we'd always encourage you to start painting with acrylic paint, simply because that's probably what you're going to use for the most part when you're airbrushing. Generally speaking, with almost any brand of acrylic paint, if you thin it 1-to-1 with their thinner, it's going to work pretty well for you. But what we're going to do is we're going to drop a bit of game color ink into the bottom of this lid here and just see how it behaves when we dip something into it and see how the drip comes off. So we want to load that up with paint. And we want to look at how that's going to drip. Now, if I bring this vertical, you're going to see that the drip forms. And when it breaks, there's no elasticity on that drip. Now that's the key. You don't want that drip to stretch and drop off. If it does that, the paint is going to be too thick to airbrush. I'm going to leave this in here. And we're going to do the same thing with a little bit of their brush paint. So a similar color. This is the game color Bloody Red. Give it a bit of a shake. And what you're going to notice right away is, of course, we know that this color is going to be thicker. But when we look to see how it's going to drip, it's going to be a massive difference. So we'll get the end of that paintbrush nicely covered in paint and lift it out. And you can see right away this drip has got a huge amount of elasticity to it. Okay, it really pulls out long before it falls off and breaks. That elasticity in the drip is what you don't want in an airbrush preparation. Now, even with a brush paint, we can modify that and change it so it's going to work in the airbrush. So if we get some Vallejo airbrush thinner, with the regular paints, you're going to have to put in a little bit more than 1:1. So I'm going to say closer to 2:1 to get the property that we want. We give it a bit of a mix here. And now if we load that end of that paintbrush up now and pull it out, what we're going to see, I think, okay, there's still some elasticity on that drip. So we're going to need to put a little bit more thinner in to get this to be an optimal airbrush formulation. So let's give that a good mix again. Let's take another look at how that drip forms. So we'll load that end up really nicely with some paint. And let's take a look at that drip. Okay, so now we're looking at it from here, and that didn't really extend before it just broke off and fell. So I'm going to say that this is now an acceptable formulation for the airbrush. The general principles of airbrushing, you've got 3 parameters that you control. 1, how fast you move over your surface. The slower you move, the more paint you'll put down on any one place. The faster you move, the less paint. The other parameter of control is how far away you are. So as the airbrush sprays, it makes a cone of atomized paint that gets wider as it gets further away. The further away you are, the wider the coverage. The closer you are, the more pinpoint it will become. And the final point is the trigger. You pull it back very far, will give you a big paint flow, and you pull it back very little, you'll get a very small paint flow. By and large, the way that you do this is the further away you are, the more you tend to pull the trigger back. The closer in you are, the less you tend to pull the trigger back. So we'll explore that together. I'm going to use some acrylic paint from Vallejo, and I'm going to mix up a small amount of their ultramarine blue. General principle, if you're going to mix in the cup of the airbrush, which I do encourage because it's just easy, please do so by putting the thinner in before the paint. So I'm going to drop in 7 drops of this color. And then I'm going to put 7 drops of paint in on top of that. What's really neat with the Evolution is you've got this cap which enables you to mix in the cup by bubbling back. So once you've got those 2 components in your paint cup, just put your hand over the front, your fingers, and pinch them together, press down, and just a light pull back, and you'll notice that that color gets mixed up in the cup perfectly by air coming back from the head. What we're going to do initially is I'm going to give you some basic settings to use to explore the trigger on your new Evolution. So using the screw at the back, I'd like you to screw it in until it stops, and then undo it approximately 1/2 turn. That's going to give you a good basic background setting. Go about 1 hand's width away with the airbrush from the surface you're painting, press the trigger down and just pull it all the way back while moving the airbrush over the surface. And you'll notice that this gives you a nice diffuse background spray. That's something that you might use for shading in a background or something like this. Now, let's turn that screw again until it stops and go about 1/4 of a turn open. And I'd like you to now be approximately 2 fingers distance away from the surface you're painting. This gives you line work or detail shading. Okay, now if you want to explore some fine detail with the airbrush, screw that in until it stops, and then I'd like you to open it 1/8 of a turn. Again, get very close with the airbrush, almost touching, so that one of the prongs of your head is possibly even touching the paper. Press the trigger down and just pull it all the way back while moving the airbrush. Now those are some basic techniques or basic settings that you can use the screw at the back for. It is really useful to help you if you haven't quite developed your muscle memory, just explore the use of that and the settings that it can give you. But I would always encourage you to try to go to a free trigger as soon as you can, because this is how you really learn how to fully manipulate the airbrush. So let's look at some basic techniques and exercises that we can practice before we start going onto a piece. What I'd like you to experiment with is if you start far away, with a large trigger opening and move in gradually whilst decreasing your trigger opening, you'll see how you can control the line and the distance and the trigger. So like this. So that's a great exercise to show you how you can control the width of your line coupled with the distance and your trigger control. If at any point when you're painting you see any color building up on your needle tip, the trick is to immediately deal with that. If you always do that, you'll never have a clog in your airbrush because all airbrush clogs start out as color drying on the tip of the needle. So try to really make it a habit that you form, that you regularly check that needle tip. And this is one of the standout features on the Harder Steenbeck range for 2024 is that all of the models that we do now give you the ability to see your needle tip, to clean your needle tip, but it always remains protected. So with the Evolution, you can just hit it with a brush like this and just clean it off. So if you see any color there, just clean it off. With a large sized brush, we like to recommend something like a number 6 to a number 8 and just give it a good clean. So let's get back here and see what else we can do with our Evolution. So here's some background shading. Some fine dots if we get in close and just pulse that trigger. We can do some pretty fine lines with it. Going right back into really fast background spray. I hope that gives you some idea of what your airbrush can do. Spend lots and lots of time painting with it, and all of this will become second nature for you before you know it. Now, your Evolution has some very specific features to help you get the most out of it, and because we regard this airbrush as our progression airbrush, it's for a painter who's learned how to paint and they're looking to improve their skills and they want to be able to paint a lot, we're taking the assumption that some form of color control is going to be useful. And that is delivered by this color control knob at the back of the airbrush. Now, what's unique about this on the Evolution 2024 is that we've put a triple start thread on there. We did this because although we've seen this feature on many airbrushes, it's difficult to use because you have to screw it in and out so many times to move between fully in and fully out. Having a triple start thread on it means it moves 3 times faster for the same number of revolutions. So what you'll notice is if you screw it all the way in until it stops, this will limit the trigger so that it cannot be pulled back. Now, what's cool about this variation is that you only need to unscrew it by 1 turn and you've got the whole movement of the trigger back. This is a function of this triple start thread, and it means that this is much more usable. So for example, if you're looking to do a fairly detailed stroke where you're quite close to the surface, you're not 100% confident in your trigger control yet, then what you can do is screw this all the way in until it stops and then unscrew it by perhaps 1/4 of a turn. This will be suitable for a stroke that's approximately 2 fingers distance away from whatever you're painting. And you'll see that your trigger throw is limited to something very, very small. If you're looking to do a larger, more general shading stroke, then what we'd advocate is that you, again, screw it in until it stops and then open it up by approximately 1/2 of a full turn. And then what you'll find is if you're approximately a fist's distance away from the surface that you're painting, you'll have a trigger travel that's quite a lot bigger. And this is great for these general shading applications at approximately that distance away from what you're painting. So this is designed to support your progression and your learning. It's similar concept to the Ultra, but it's infinitely variable. So it gives you a little bit more scope for progression. But ultimately, as far as this feature is concerned, we always encourage you to use it as a learning device, but eventually you want to be painting with a free trigger because that gives you more creative expression without having to think about what you're doing. But it's a great way to learn the muscle memory. I'd also like to talk very briefly about what we call the X-Center cam control. Now, on a Harder Steenbeck, this part here, this gold part, is what we call the X-Center. Now, the X-Center is shaped like a cam, and what it does is it governs the relationship between the motion that you put into the trigger and the motion that transfers to the needle. Without going into too much detail, what we've discovered in our research is that a beginner feels comfortable with a certain kind of trigger response that's perhaps a little bit less sensitive at the front of the trigger whereas an expert user really wants a very, very instant response from the needle compared to how they're interacting with the trigger. And so we use this X center as a cam so that each airbrush has a very distinct character. The Ultra is something for a beginner who's learning how to do detail. They don't have the super fine control of an expert, and the cam shape on the X center supports that. And then on the Infinity, you've got a cam shape that gives you instant response for an expert user. The evolution is somewhere in the middle. This is why we call it the progression airbrush. And so I just wanted to give you an understanding of why that X center is such an important part of why people find Harder Steenbeck airbrushes so easy to work with from beginner through to expert level. Another key feature that I really want you to take the time to learn how to use is what we call the needle cap. Now at Harder Steenbeck we have a concept on the front of the airbrush, which means that on any of them you can always see the needle tip, you can always clean the needle tip, but it always remains protected. This is really important because you've probably heard people talk about color clogging in the airbrush as one of the things that can be frustrating with airbrushing, and there is a way to banish it completely from your airbrushing experience. And that is simply this: always keep an eye and make a habit of keeping an eye on your needle tip. As soon as you see color starting to dry on your needle tip, and you may also hear the way the airbrush sounds change slightly when that happens, clean it off. And so if you see any color drying on the needle tip, then what I'd like you to do is, using a large brush, don't use a small one because you don't want the ferrule to touch any of the head components. So a number 6 to a number 8, even to a number 10 is perfect. Dip it in a little bit of water and literally just clean that front end like this until you see that there's no color left on the needle tip. As soon as that's done, put the brush down, couple of quick taps on the airflow just to blow everything off the needle, and you'll be good to go again, knowing that there's no chance of a clog happening now because you've removed that dried color from the tip of the needle. This is a really, really key part of your painting process, and if you can integrate that habit of looking at the needle tip frequently and cleaning it up whenever you see some dried color, then you'll never have a clog in your airbrush. The other function of this cap, because now you're in the progression phase of your airbrushing and you're trying to do more detail, is you can be far more accurate if you set the orientation of this so that you can see your needle tip. So when you can see the needle tip very well, you can see exactly where that paint is going to land when you're working very close on high detail applications. So this is why this is shaped as it is, and hopefully that gives you the insight to get the most out of it. So now we're going to get into the phase where we strip the airbrush, take all the parts out, take a look at them, and put them all back together. Before we do this, I'd just like to say that a lot of people do strip their airbrushes far more often than they need to. We don't advocate that you need to strip them after every painting session. If you've got a good painting process, you should only really need to clean the parts that you've had paint in. It doesn't mean you need to strip the whole back end. So don't do more work on this than you have to. However, let's get to know what's inside this airbrush. So the first part that you always take off the airbrush is the handle. So we'll start with that. So we just spin it off here like this. I'm going to set that to one side and just show you, if you'd like to put a little bit of lubricant on the threads in the color control, you just unscrew it like that. And if you'd like to put a little bit of lubricant here, you can. We recommend the Iwata Super Lube. We think it's a really good product and pretty much the best one out there because it doesn't interfere with paint in terms of its adhesion. So that makes it very valuable. So that's your end piece taken off. That now exposes the back end of the needle and the needle chuck. You can remove a Harder Steenbeck needle from the front or from the back. We know that most people take them out from the back, so in this video I'm going to first of all show you how to do that. So what you first of all do is loosen the needle chuck here. Just a quarter of a turn is plenty, and then you can just pull the needle out from the back. Be aware that the tip of the needle is fairly sharp, so you don't want to poke yourself with it, and you also want to put it somewhere where it can't roll away. So I'm going to put it on this cloth over here. We can then remove the head. So once the needle is out, we can take the head off. So you just do that on a Harder Steenbeck simply by unscrewing it. And what that does is that releases both the nozzle and the air cap. The nozzle just drops out. If from the air cap. It's a very, very simple system. So I'm just going to set those to one side. And then the air cap and the needle cap are a push fit on the Evolution, and they can just be pulled apart like that. I'm going to set those to the side. In the back end of the airbrush, we've designed this so that you don't need any tools whatsoever to accomplish a strip. If you'd like to take off the needle chuck next, you just unscrew that. Set that to one side. The next part that comes off is the middle piece. The middle piece holds the needle guide and the tensioning spring that puts that spring pressure on the needle. So you just simply grip it and unscrew it. You then have the ability to remove the needle guide from the middle piece. We'll set that to one side along with the tensioning spring. As you can see, my trigger's already come out, so let's just put that back in and re-simulate that. So the trigger sits in the trigger slot like this. To remove it, you simply pull it out. Set that to one side. The cups are of course removable on the Evolution, and this is done by screwing. So that just screws out like that. And then the final component that you might like to remove is your air valve. So first of all, the quick disconnect tail. We can just remove that by unscrewing. And finally, the air valve body itself unscrews like that. And that is now a full strip of your Harder Steenbeck Evolution 2024 CR+. You can strip further if you wish by unscrewing this little screw in the base of the air valve to remove the plunger and the spring, but there's not a lot of reasons why you'd need to do that. So I'm not going to cover that in this video because it's really not part of your day-to-day practice. We do have other content that shows you how to do that. To put the airbrush back together, we just start and do the same thing in reverse order. So first thing I'm going to pick up is the air valve. And you'll notice with everything that we've done, you can't put anything back the wrong way around. It's all engineered so that there's only one way you can put it back together. So even if you don't watch this video, we think that you'll probably still be okay. So we screw the air valve in, just a light finger tight is all that's needed. You don't need to put any kind of pressure on it. We'll get the quick disconnect tail back on if you're using that system. The next thing to go in is the trigger. So always put the trigger in with the X center at the back. That's the way that it functions in the airbrush. And you just drop it into place. And what you need to feel is you can feel the spring on the air valve. And as soon as you feel that, you know you've got your trigger correctly located. The next step that you're going to go for is you'll set the airbrush down. And then you'll take your spring for your needle carriage system, drop that into the middle piece. And then you're going to pick up the needle guide. As you'll notice, it has these grooves cut into it of what we call rifling. Now these are put into the bearing surface to hold lubricant in a way that it is released as needed while you're operating the airbrush. We suggest that you use the Iwata Superlube on this. Again, it's a great product because it has no negative impact on paint if you get a little bit of it on your fingers. Drop that in there, and then you simply put your trigger into the rest position, feed that in the back. You don't really need to worry about how it lines up, as it'll self-align, and just screw that in. Once that's in, a couple of pulls on the trigger will make sure that your X center mates with the needle guide. You'll know it's mated if you grab the back of the needle guide and give it a side-to-side twist and you feel that it's locked into the X center. If it isn't locked, if I simulate that, then you'll feel that as you do that side-to-side twist, it will lock. Okay? Now that that's in place, you can now take your needle chuck, screw that on, screw it on until it stops, and then loosen it off by a quarter turn or so that it's not too tight to put your needle in. We're now going to screw the cup on, and so it's really just a simple offering it up into the cup recess and screwing it on, and again, just down to a reasonable finger tightness. The Harder Steenbeck head is one of the simplest heads on the market. So the way that we suggest you put this back on is simply by pushing the needle cap over the air cap. We always suggest you do this first because one of the functions of the needle cap is to protect both the nozzle once it's in and the needle. So put that on first so that you've got this assembly. Then you just simply pick up your nozzle, carefully drop it in to the air cap, offer it up to the front of the airbrush, and again just screw it down clockwise until it's a reasonable finger tightness. You don't need to put massive torque into it, just enough that it feels like it's home. Okay, before you put the needle in, just check that you haven't tightened your needle chuck, just so it's loose, so you know you can get the needle in. And we've designed the interior of this needle chuck so that it self-guides the needle. We'd always encourage you to be careful when you're putting it back in, but at least you know with this particular design that it will self-guide it for you, so that you don't need to be too concerned about damaging the tip of the needle. Push it carefully with the tip of your finger until you feel it touch on the nozzle. Once it's in, just a couple of rotations just to seat it, tighten up your needle chuck, and you're good to go. You can check the operation of your airbrush now by pushing up and down. You should feel the spring on the air valve and moving back and forth, and you should feel the spring on the needle, and you should see the needle moving in sympathy with all these other parts at the back end. Once that's done, you screw your end piece back on. And there's two ways you can have this. Some people like it in this vertical position like that. Other people prefer to set it here so that they don't feel this cutout on their finger when they're holding the airbrush. Either way is fine, and there's an O-ring in there that you've got sufficient grip that it will stay in either of those positions. And that is a full strip and reassembly of your Evolution airbrush. You'll either have purchased your airbrush as a solo or as one of our 2-in-1 sets. If it's the 2-in-1, then you'll need to know how to switch between the nozzle sizes and the cup sizes to get the most from the versatility that your Evolution's chassis has to offer you. So let's get into that. So the first point is how to change the cup size. That's very simple. You simply unscrew the cup, set that to one side, then you can pick up the other cup size, and it simply screws in to that same recess that you took the other cup from here. Again, you always just go to a good finger tight. It's not a hard finger tight, just a nice little nip so that you know that it's secured. In terms of changing the head size, please don't think of it as a needle size, because this will kind of misguide you into thinking that you're just changing a needle. Every time you change a head size on a Harder Steenbeck airbrush, you need to be changing the nozzle, the air cap, and the needle as well. So that's very, very important. Those three parts always have to be matched. So let's open up this nozzle set and see what's inside. So the first thing that you'll notice is when you pull the needle out, you'll notice that there's 4 notches on the back of the needle. Okay? This denotes that this is one of our 0.45 or 0.4 needles. It's the same needle, suitable for both sizes. So those 4 notches indicate that it's for the 0.4 or the 0.45 setup. So I'm just going to set that down. If I open the other end of the tube, what's going to come out then is the air cap, the needle cap, and the nozzle all in one assembly. So let's take a look at those in detail. So again, if you look at the nozzle, you'll see 4 stripes on it. That means that that's our new 0.45 nozzle. If we put that down to one side and we pull the needle cap off of the air cap, then what you'll see there is again these 4 stripes on the barrel here, which indicate that this is the Evolution 0.45. So you always want to match these 4 stripes on the air cap with 4 stripes on the nozzle with 4 bumps on the needle. When you're looking at the 0.28 setup, it's going to be 2 stripes on the air cap, 2 stripes on the nozzle, and 2 bumps on the back of the needle. So it's very, very important to get the correct performance from each setup. So I'm going to reassemble the needle cap onto the air cap just by pressing it on. I'm going to put that nozzle back into the head just by dropping it in. And then we're ready to do a size change. First thing you need to do is remove the end piece of the airbrush. So we're just going to remove that and set it to one side. And then we release the needle chuck. 1/4 turn just to make it loose enough to be able to extract the needle. I'm going to demonstrate the other way that you can remove an H&S needle. and that is from the front. Some people prefer to do it that way because they feel there's less risk to the tip. We have mitigated that risk when you put it in from the back by the special shaping inside the needle chuck itself. But some people prefer to do it out the front, and it supports both ways. So loosen the needle chuck off first. That's very important that you do that before you do anything else. Then come to the front of the airbrush, simply unscrew the head. Everything will come out, and you just pull it out in one go, being careful of your needle tip as you do so, and just set it down to the side. Your needle is now loose because you've released the needle chuck. You just push the needle from the back and then grab it on the shank and just pull it all the way out the front. Okay, and that's your needle out. Let's put that down. To switch it over to the 0.4, you grab the needle, put it in the back end of the needle into the front of the airbrush, and it will self-guide down into the needle packing. You just press it through. Sometimes a little bit of force is needed, but not too much. So if you ever need to apply a lot of force to anything on one of our airbrushes, stop, because you're probably doing it wrong, okay? Push it in until you can see the needle start to come out the back of the airbrush. As soon as you see that, pull it until the needle tip has gone away and you can no longer see the needle tip in the front of the airbrush. Then pick up your 0.4 setup with the nozzle inside. Simply put it in the front and screw it into place. Again, how tight should this be? It's what we call a good finger tight. So it's not anything that you put any effort into, but it's certainly a positive tightening. Once that's in, now you come back to the needle, push it gently into place with your fingertip until you feel it stop, and then seat it by just rotating it a little bit into the nozzle, and then tightening up your needle chuck. And that is now a size change from the 0.28 to the 0.45 on your evolution. Put the end piece back on, set it to your comfortable position, whether it be vertical or horizontal, and you're good to go. Now I'm going to take you through the basics of cleaning your evolution. One of the things I would say is every time you change colors, that's an opportunity to give your airbrush a quick flush through and clean. Doing that throughout your painting session will mean that when you come to the end of the day, cleanup is going to be an absolute breeze. And it's important that it is, because you might be tired after a long painting session and you want to make sure that you do that well. The parts inside our airbrushes are finished to a very, very high degree, so cleanup is pretty straightforward. The essential components are your spray out station. Using one of these manages the large amount of overspray that you would otherwise produce when you're spraying large volumes of cleaner through the airbrush. First step is get your airbrush, point it carefully in the front, and simply pull the trigger all the way back whilst the trigger is depressed to get rid of whatever paint's in the airbrush. So that's done now, and the next step is to remove any excess color from the bowl. Now we've actually reshaped all of our bowls so that the bottom shape of the bowl kind of suits your pinky finger pretty well. So pick up a piece of paper towel, and just get it into that airbrush cup and take out any excess paint just by wiping your finger around inside the bowl. Just makes cleaning a little faster. Pick up your airbrush cleaner. We'd always encourage you to use the same cleaner as the paint brand that you've been painting with, and get about a half full into your cup. At this point, if you like, you can pick up your cleaning brush, just give it a bit of a brush around inside of there, just so that you pick up any paint that you've got on the edges of your cup, and then just spray that out. Now, one of the things you want to do is pulse the trigger while you're doing that so that you clean the full length of your needle. This first batch of cleaner through the cup, you don't really need to worry about agitating it with a bubble back. Just get the volume through there so that you know that you've got a bit of cleaner through there before you really try to do a final clean. Once that's sprayed through, we now want to do what's called a bubble back. This is a really good way of agitating the cleaner in all of those paint ways to make sure we've got a really good solid clean. So let's put some cleaner back in the cup. Pinch the front of your airbrush like this, press down for air and pull the trigger slightly back, and you'll see some bubbles arriving in the cup. Okay, that's a good bit of agitation. spray a bit of cleaner through again into the spray out pot, and then do another bubble back. And again, spray through until it's gone. Now what you'll notice with the new Evolution is we've modified the accenter on the trigger to give a large needle throw at the back. So it does spray through very, very fast, even on the fine 0.28 millimeter head that we're using right now. Once we've sprayed that second cup load through, we're now getting very close to the point where the airbrush is perfectly clean. So just another half cup, a short bubble back, we spray out what's left in there. Now the only disadvantage of the spray out pots is they do tend to have the overspray bouncing around inside there, which can get a bit of color on your head, which I think you can just about see here. It's pretty easy to deal with. Just pick up your mug of water and just give it a bit of a clean up with the brush like that. Like I say, always use a pretty large brush size. This one's really on the limit of how small it should be. You'd really want to have it a bit bigger than this. And just clean up that front end until you can't see any color there at all. Once that's done, tap the trigger a couple of times just to get any flow off of there, and then you should be good to go. Now we can check this by removing the needle to see if there's any color left on it. So let's unscrew the back of the airbrush, loosen the needle chuck by 1/4 of a turn, pull the needle out, and what we will see is a very, very minuscule amount of color on there, nothing significant. It's really just a bit of tinted water. I'm okay with that, and I think that is good enough to put the airbrush away and be ready for our next painting session. If you'd like to really get rid of the very last traces of color, our friend Angel Giraldez has got a great tip where all you do is have your mug of water there, submerge the airbrush under the cup, and just spray it underwater. And what that does is it just gets a large amount of water through the airbrush and just really cleans it through exceptionally well. And what you'll now see, if we spray out the remnants of that, is we'll have absolutely nothing left on the tip of the needle. Perfectly clean, really simple, no stripping necessary. Keep it simple and just enjoy the painting process. So I hope that was informative. I hope that we've set you up for success with your new Evolution 2024 CR+. So all that remains for me to do is to once again say thank you very much for joining Harder Steenbeck. Please stay tuned to our YouTube channel. There's so much useful content on there from me and from lots of other people that contribute to our channel. So we hope that we support you well. Any questions, please get in touch with us back at the factory. We'd be more than happy to help. In the meantime, please enjoy your painting and enjoy the wonderful world of creativity that the airbrush will open up for you.